Okay, I changed my mind. We are doing 4 videos for groups because I was pretty thorough with the group problem solving. So this last video is on group leadership and tips on how to participate and run meetings. So when you think of leadership, who do you think of as a good leader? Whether it's somebody you know personally or somebody that might be famous that you think is a good leader. And why do you think they're a good leader? What kinds of characteristics do they have? That's a great way to start looking at leadership. We're going to look at it in a little bit of a different way. It ties in a little bit to what we've already talked about as far as our ability to have different types of power in a group. But leadership is really the ability to influence others' behaviors and thoughts towards a productive end. It doesn't necessarily mean stand up, dictator, tell people what to do. In fact, oftentimes that's not effective leadership. It could be. So we're going to try to expand our horizons a little bit on leadership and what that looks like. One of the concepts that is more prevalent now in the workplace is the idea of shared leadership. When somebody has a vested interest in something or a stake or a sense of ownership in a project, they tend to feel more satisfied. They tend to be more motivated. They want to be successful. They want the group to be successful, so you're more likely to achieve its goals. So creating an environment where everyone has some leadership, everyone has some ability to influence others, even adding an encouragement, having each person be in charge of a meeting, for example, might be things you could do in other circumstances in working with groups. But when you're not vested and not interested, that's tough. Everyone's motivated differently, especially with class projects. You know, some of you, your goal is to get an A in the assignment in the class, and some of you, your goal might just be to pass the class. Sometimes life happens, and that might be all you can do. And so, trying to figure out how do we share leadership, how do we motivate each other, those would be all things to keep in mind. So, let's dive into leadership more specifically with different types. There are different approaches to leadership. We're going to go over some of the major approaches that are listed here in the red box. Trait leadership is basically personality based. Like someone's a born leader, they're natural at leading. And while that might be true, there are actual other styles or approaches that also are important to know. So let's look at functional. Functional leadership is all about tasks and processes. It's very practical, right? And you're identifying the tasks and the behaviors that we need to do to accomplish the job, the process or the approach, the procedure that you're going to be using, and what do we need to do to help maintain a nice, harmonious group climate. So it's a very practical approach, and it's very specific to the task and the feelings of the group, in a nutshell, of course. The styles approach is identifying 3 different other methods of interaction when you are in exerting leadership. One approach is authoritarian, and that's the person that's directing or controlling or telling or giving orders. And it doesn't mean that they're mean, so please don't assume that this is a mean, intimidating person. It does not mean that. It could be, but that's somebody that is providing direction and telling the group what to do and how to proceed. That would be authoritarian. Democratic is an approach that tries to help develop consensus among the group leaders. It tends to be more unifying in the approach of that particular leadership style or even the way you're communicating. And laissez-faire is really a very lax approach to leadership. They may not actually be leading, or they're only doing it when asked or directed. Sometimes, and it's not always negative, we assume this is negative, but sometimes if you have a group that's working really well together, maybe you don't need someone to tell you what to do. You don't need an authoritarian. Maybe you're not at a point where you're working on developing consensus yet. Maybe you just need somebody who kind of prods you a little bit. That could be laissez-faire. Um, so those are different styles that you can use to exert leadership and that sort of thing. And sometimes the approach that's called situational is changing it up. Like if you have a disorganized group, they might need more of an authoritarian approach until they get their act together and can proceed more on their own. And then maybe a laissez-faire approach would be good for them. So situational is the ability to adapt your leadership approach to the way the group is working. And so sometimes that's really effective. Transformational approach is another type of leadership. It's built more on modeling leadership, encouraging the person as well as the group as far as their activities go. It might be more inspirational. It might include creating vision, mission statements, sometimes challenging people to go further. It's, I think, probably more of an interactive type of approach some of the time. And you can read more about each one of these. You just need to know a little bit about leadership in this particular class. You would dive in much more detail in a business management class, for example. Our point here is there are different ways to lead. You don't have to be a designated leader necessarily to exert leadership. And there are different ideas on the best way to lead in any particular given group. We do want to avoid unethical leadership. So bullying is in this category. Harsh criticism, name calling, gossip, slander, personal attacks, threats. That is unethical leadership. Whether you are a leader or just a member in the group with no appointed position, this is not okay. We are not going to do this in our groups. You shouldn't do this in other group situations as well, although it does happen, but that is not effective or appropriate for working effectively in a group. There are other approaches to leadership that are unethical. Machiavellianism, which is using deceit and flattery and being exploitive strategically, right, towards achieving an end. So this is the ends justify the means kind of idea. So we would also consider that to be unethical. And it appears to be positive in that particular case, but it's an unethical purpose, and so it is considered unethical leadership. Now, what about those meetings that you have to attend? How can you lead a meeting better, or how can you participate in a meeting to make the meeting better? Anybody can exert leadership in a meeting, even if you're not in charge of leading the meeting, right? So here's a couple of tips on exerting leadership in meetings. The first one is, if you happen to be in charge of the meeting, you should plan the meeting. You should provide a justification for the meeting. You would want to tell the group members what the purpose is and who the participants are, and you want to make sure you have an agenda. Having an agenda helps you keep on track leading the meeting, as well as managing time. You need to manage the meeting structure. And if we were in class and we were working on a half a semester group long project, I would have each person run a meeting. But we don't need to do that in our online class. But you will have meetings in the future that you need to lead, so you should know how to do that. So make sure you know what your goal for the meeting is. Meetings without a purpose is a waste of time. So make sure that you are clear on your goals. Make sure you have identified what needs to be discussed with all of these people that are attending the meeting, and make sure you're organized with your agenda. Your agenda, right, is your list of things that you need to accomplish during the meeting. It could be things that just need to be discussed. It might be things that need to be action taken, assigning responsibilities or projects to follow up on, and it could be just informational. So when you are in a meeting, some of the things to keep in mind are people's time is valuable. We're in that culture that is monochronic, and we want to value people's time. And so you want to have sometimes help. If you're leading the meeting, have someone help monitor your time if that's something that you don't want to do or feel comfortable doing. But as a participant, when you have an agenda, you can speak up, and you can indicate that you're a little concerned that we're not going to reach all the items on the agenda. So you can speak up and help those facilitate time if they're not. Want to make sure that you use gatekeeping skills, right? Encourage people to talk who haven't been, or if those people are talking too much, we want to thank them for their participation and allow other people to participate. Meta discussion is discussion about the discussion process. So in other words, if it's maybe not very productive, or it's being more name calling, accusatory, that type of thing, we can encourage I language versus the you messages. We can use the talking stick to let each person take a turn without interruptions, right? Those are things that you can do. Be aware of the time, what the time that you're taking in a situation. A lot of times you end up with individual stories that go on too long, that are irrelevant to everybody else in the meeting. And you want to try to structure the organization, the interaction. Okay. And so sometimes it happens very organically, but sometimes we need to provide that structure to keep the meeting on track, right? Because otherwise the meeting will go on indefinitely. It's like blame the agenda. I know this is an interesting topic or a hot topic, but we need to keep on, and we need to move on to the next item. Right? So if you are running a meeting, you want to make sure that you're prepared. Your job is to help keep the group focused, help keeping them from going off topic. Watch the time or have somebody help you with that. Manage distractions. If you have conflict, you may have to intervene and manage the conflict. Don't just sit back and allow it to happen if it's not being done well. So be careful of that. You want to summarize throughout the meeting as you go, recap, and make sure that everybody understands what happens next. So with the follow-up, if there are deadlines to meet, when the next meeting is, make sure you summarize the meeting and make sure everybody knows what happens next. So hopefully you can be a little more proactive in your meetings. Even if you aren't the leader, there are ways that you can help out.